episode of Party XP. I'm your host, Lakan, and I'm joined once again by my friend Jeff. Say hi, Jeff.
Hi, Jeff.
Been a little bit while here, right? We've actually done, 2 episodes in a row now? You know, we had the our regular scheduled episode, and then we had the spoopy holiday episode, the Halloween
Yes,
episode.
the spoopy episode.
Yeah, we're just going to get back into our regular schedule here, and, we're just not going to go ahead and skip any weeks, basically, and just keep going on our regular timing, I guess, right? You guys got a bonus episode from us, and we're just going to keep moving on. Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're actually going to talk a little bit about a subject that we are both just happen to be really big fans or passionate about, and we're kind of just go into like our history on it and see, just kind of shoot the shit. Something a little bit more of a casual episode, I guess, for us, right?
Yeah, I'd say this is one of those gush episodes, so where the both of us have played this game and we really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and this game is something that actually came back into my radar after I had kind of forgotten about it. You had brought it up one day, I think, in our group chat, and I think no one else kind of caught onto it, but I just saw you talk about it, and I was like, wait, this is still around? And then you kind of you kind of brought me back in, and I was like, oh wow, this game's still around. It's still pretty popular, actually. It's kind of cool to see this game still kind of holding on there with pretty strong community as well too.
Yeah, so I think the game in question has a very strong niche community that really enjoys it. I think it sort of transcends its community a little bit sometimes because the training mode and the combo system is a lot of fun. And I think you'll see people pick it up every once in a while just because of that. And, well, I guess we'll get into it. The game that we're discussing is Street Fighter X Tekken. Probably not what you thought we'd be talking about, but it's a game that I really, really enjoyed, and I continue to enjoy to this day. And I know it's one, Lacan, that you really liked.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
so let's get into it.
Yeah. So I guess a little bit of history, I guess, on our end here. We've talked about it before, where you are a big fighting game guy, right?
Correct.
And you've been playing fighting games for how long? Just like a rough estimate at this point.
Let's see. I'm 32, so 30 years.
30 years. There we go. So basically, as soon as you hit 2 years old, fight pad, right in front of you.
Smashing my face on the Super Nintendo controller.
I was into fighting games, but not as early as you were. I was definitely later on. For me, I want to say I was like 8 or 9 when I started really getting to fighting games. And even then, it was still at a relatively surface level. I was not very good at them. I just I was a button masher. Like for everybody out there, I was a scrub, basically.
Oh, God, yeah. I didn't get good at this stuff till I was like an adult, so don't worry about it.
Even as an adult, I'm still pretty much trash. I've accepted at this point that I'm never going to get truly good at this game, or this type of game anyway. What was your first major fighting game?
So the first fighting game was Street Fighter 2, of course.
Okay, yeah. I straight up missed it. Straight up missed that one.
Right. So then the first game where I played the first 2 games I played extensively were Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Capcom vs. SNK 2.
Okay, so you had a crossover title in there as well then for one of your
both
first
of them.
major games. There we go, yeah.
That was those were the first set of games that I played the most, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the games where I really took the next step was in Street Fighter 4 Vanilla, and then this Street Fighter X Tekken as well is where I kind of took that next step and got good, for the lack of a better term. And I was I don't mean to brag, but I got to like the highest I've gotten in a fighting game in Street Fighter X Tekken. I think I was like A ranked on Xbox.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah, I was getting my ass slapped around. I did not get good at that game at all. Same for me, I guess. The first game I got, I was actually a Tekken guy growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I had Tekken 2 in the arcades and one of the pizza spots nearby us. Remember Pizza and?
Yeah.
They had the Tekken 2 machine in there, which eventually became Tekken 3. And every time, I would be with my mom or my dad grabbing a pie, me and Gabe would just dump like $1 quarters in there and just play Tekken 2 and Tekken 3 a lot.
Mm-hmm. I remember the Tekken 2 machine there was the combination Fuddruckers Popeyes on 22, and the Popeyes had like a killer game room, and they had Tekken 2.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of a mash. This kind of works out then for this game, right? So you grew up as Street Fighter Capcom guy, right? I grew up mostly a Tekken guy, and then I also got very into Street Fighter 4 as well. Like that was the
Right.
game. Like our group kind of picked it up. Like surprisingly, right? Our entire group picked up this game. That usually doesn't happen unless it's like a Smash, which is a little a little more casual. Easier to pick up for everybody else, right? And then Street Fighter 4 came out and pulled a lot more than I expected of our friend group into like actually trying to play like fighting games. I felt there was a different dynamic at that point, and I got really into Street Fighter 4, and that was like my first real entry into like the 2D fighter style game. And I got decent at Street Fighter 4. I still have this very vivid memory of us playing at our friend Zach's house, where it was like you, Zach, and Buffa, and Demetrius, who were like, you guys have a more extensive history in terms of like 2D fighters, right? And then me.
Right.
so it's always like, loser gives up, right? Loser passes the controller to the next person, right? And I remember the entire night, I was the only person to not be able to hold the controller for more than one match, basically. I had a very, very clear memory of being like, I am not good at this game, but I'm having a good time, but I was having a good time because, we're with our friends, and we're, even if we're kind of shooting this shit while we're playing, it's just like, oh man, but it was enough to keep me engaged. And even if I was like losing, I was still having a really good time, like trying to learn to play the game with people who are genuinely better than me. Right. And then, a couple months go by, and then, some more of our friend group kind of drop off playing the game, but you kept playing the game and I kept playing the game. And
Oh yeah.
we kept going, and then I got to a point where I got like decent, and I remember like playing you again after like a while, and then like our group got back together again, right? Demetrius, Zach, Buffa, you, me, and I remember being able to hold on to the controller for more than like 2 or 3 matches, and I was like, "Yo, I've gotten it." And then I got back to you, and then I got my ass whooped again.
Yeah. I remember coming out of the hyperbolic time chamber, and the growth that I was able to have felt good, right? It felt good
Yeah.
to be able to just be the guy. So with Street Fighter 4, it's funny. I didn't really grind ranked all that much.
You just played a lot of the
I
game.
I actually grinded. They had what was called championship mode, and basically it was like a pseudo tournament style bracket. So what you would do is you would queue for your round one game, and you would play a round one game, and if you won, you played in the second round. And then when you queued again, you would play other players who were at like the second round stage. And then if you won them, you went to the finals, quote unquote, and you would play a person that was also at the finals rank. And then if you won, you got like way more points, and you were able to move up in grades, and that was a low risk, like low pressure sort of ranked esque system.
Okay.
And that's really what I grinded on to get to the point where I was stronger.
Was this
as
a
player.
mode in the game?
Yeah, this was another ranked mode.
I
So
might have
you
missed
had
out
like
on the thing,
ranked
yeah.
mode.
I just played regular ranked.
Yeah, you had ranked, you had player match, and then you had this championship mode. It came a little later, so I wouldn't expect anyone to remember it.
Okay.
But that was what got me to play the game a lot more, because I kind of felt like with ranked, and like with a lot of ranked, you watch your numbers go down and you get frustrated, right? And then you don't want to play anymore. But with this, you didn't lose anything. You just went back to square one.
Okay, gotcha.
And for me, that was kind of what made it so much more fun and so much more enjoyable. And that's what got me to play the game. And so I'm grateful for Street Fighter 4, and then that sort of carried over to Street Fighter Cross Tekken.
Yeah, so Street Fighter 4 came out 2008 in arcades, and came out in 2009 on consoles. And that was a big year, right? Just 2009 like had a bunch of like big fighting games come out that year. I mean, Tekken 6 also came out that year later on, and there was like this huge revival of the fighting game genre, right? Because it was kind of like back in the 90s and maybe early 2000s, especially like arcades, right? Arcades were massive back then. You go in there, you put your token or your quarter on the machine, you call next, and then there's this big community around it, but it was mostly in arcades. and then that kind of faded away. We've mentioned that fighting games is like a like a bit of a niche community, right? Like it's a very unfriendly to newbie type video game, right? You go in there, if you play against a bunch of people who already know what they're doing, you get beat, you just lost one of your plays, and you got to move, out of the way, right?
Yeah.
This, I mean, and especially around that time, we were at what PS3, and Xbox 360, right? So online gaming, while not, still not perfect to the today, but back then was like serviceable, right? We can actually get online, start playing people online, not having to go to arcades and search for people to learn how to play with. Yeah, like that's kind of like was this big boom of like the revival of the fighting game like genre, right? Especially for like the home, for the home console and the player base.
Right. Well, I'd take it a step further, and I would say that it's because of the way that PS3 and Xbox 360's onlines were set up that this boom could happen. Because if we were still playing on the original Xbox and the PS2 servers, forget it, we'd be cooked.
Oh yeah, no, it would never happen. And and again, I mentioned right then and there, like Street Fighter 4 and Tekken 6 both came out in home consoles in 2009. And we if we talk about like the two biggest fighting games, I'm can confidently say, right, Street Fighter and Tekken are the big boys, right? That's the two that everyone kind of like. You split into one of two camps, basically, right? You play the 3D
Right.
fighter
Right.
Tekken, you play the 2D fighter Street Fighter, right? And then when this game was announced, it was teased in 2010, at prior to the finals of Evo, right? And a lot of people thought it was going to be the new Darkstalkers game. And then a couple weeks later at San Diego Comic-Con, again 2010, like a year after this revival of the fighting game genre, especially on home consoles, this game was announced. Take the two biggest fighting games and just mash them together, which was massive, massive at the time. And I remember like us and our friend group just losing our minds, thinking, "Oh my god, we're finally getting this crossover, this insane crossover, this thing we never thought would ever happen." And then like just being so hyped for this to finally come out. Yeah, man, I remember just trying to consume as much media as I could on it. Early YouTube, especially at the time, just trying to find any sort of footage we can get. People's like camera footage. You know what I mean? They would bring like a digital camera, them try to record it at the convention, like the little bit of gameplay they would show off, and then put it up online and just all the comment threads and all that stuff about it. I was so excited for this game when it first came out, or it was first announced actually.
Yeah. So it's funny. I went to speaking of Comic Con. That was the year that I went to Comic Con, and I was able to play this in like a beta form, and I
Mm.
was so happy with it. The first kind of things that you saw, though, kind of you knew it wasn't going to be Tekken. It was basically like a special version of Street Fighter 4, but that didn't change anything. I was still super excited for this game, and it turned out to be well founded because I ended up playing this quite a bit.
Mm.
But
Yeah, it was.
yeah, I think we should get into everything about Street Fighter Cross Tekken, right?
Oh yeah,
The system and all that.
absolutely, yeah. So you mentioned it right there, that it was like again like it was very similar to Street Fighter 4, and it was we had to smash the Tekken characters in there, right? So it ended up taking on like gameplay wise, yeah, like a Street Fighter 4 for the most part, right? That's like their base game, but they mixed it in with the Tekken tag style gameplay, where it was a 2v2, like a tag team, right? And like Tekken Tag, all you had to do was knock out one of your opponent's fighters. So it had that mix gameplay elements of both, basically, at least in terms of like the overall structure of the game.
Right, right. So what you could, but I mean, it had its own system things that Tekken Tag didn't come up with, where you could, split health bars and do, all of that. Whereas Tekken Tag, it really felt like you were playing two separate characters on like at once. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah, yeah.
you had two separate characters in Street Fighter Cross Tekken. It kind of felt like you were playing a team more,
Hmm.
right? It kind of had that Marvel 2, that CVS 2 kind of method where, well, not even CVS 2, more like the Marvel 2 method, where you really felt like you were playing a team versus a two individual characters.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, because there was a lot more like integrated, like team play, right? There was the what was it called? It was the like, was it like a cross rush, I think it was called, the Magic series combo where you can basically tag in another character in the middle
Right.
of a
Hmm.
combo. So it had that, there's more play between the two. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm just gonna tag my other person out and then like, just basically start from neutral again, right? It was more like you kind of flowed in and out of the two different characters at the same time.
Right, and I really enjoyed that where if, in a pinch, depending on if you landed a hit, you could either launch, which is the end of the Magic series, right? You would launch the opponent and your tag team partner would come in, or you could cancel your Magic series into an EX move, right? So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
would hit two punches or two kicks. You would expend one of your bars, one of your super bar meter bars, and you would continue the combo that way. And I like that. I thought that was creative. The other thing that you could do too is just like Darkstalkers, you could Magic Series into a sweep, right? You could Magic Series into a sweep. You knock your opponent down, and then you make your next play. It didn't always end in the launcher, which was nice,
Hmm.
and I appreciated that. And I thought that's one of the things that made Street Fighter Cross Tekken's battle system unique and fun to play, because it gave characters that didn't have a lot of options more options, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you had a character that had lacking normals, let's say, you didn't really have much in the way of link potential. I'm looking at like Zangief, right?
Yeah.
So you didn't really have a lot in the way of link potential, but in this game, Zangief could always end on sweep, and then he could move forward and continue his attack, his offense. And I like that. Every character kind of has a chance. Granted, what they do with that chance is different, and you'll see like the tier list, and you'll see which characters are clearly better than the others. And Zangief isn't one of them, but at least you have that option.
That's your boy, right? Zangief's your guy.
He settled into one of my like side characters pretty early on, just based on how I play anime fighters,
Hmm.
because I don't actually learn anime fighters. I just play the grappler characters, so that's like
Gotcha.
Blaze Blue, Guilty Gear, and all the like that.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't learn those games. So I played grapplers. So I was like, well, if I play the grapplers in these other games, why don't I try playing Zangief? And I love Zangief. I think he's so much fun.
Gotcha.
I think
Okay.
he's a. I love his animations. I love his character design. I think he's the perfect mix of frightening giant professional wrestler and goofball.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Absolutely. I'm a bit more boring in terms of my character choice. I'm a just basically a Ryu player.
Well, Ryu's my main.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
Ryu's
I
my
mean, like
main character.
in every game, I always end up playing like the Ryu type character, the one who's basically like the balanced character. And I very seldom move away from that personally. You know what I mean?
Right.
And the only other person I ended up falling like in love with in terms of like a play style was Abel from Street Fighter 4,
Yeah.
because I'm a big mixed martial arts guy, right? And Abel was modeled after Fedor Emelianenko, and again, kind of like a he had a mix of he had a command grab, he had his quarter circle inputs and stuff like that, which he could double up on and triple up on with his rush down combo. And then I remember like when I started learning how to play the game, I started learning how to do the one frame links with him. That was like the first person I started taking to the next level in terms of like gameplay. And another game that had Abel in it, I was super happy. That's why I was also very stoked for
Yeah,
Street
for
Fighter
sure.
4 to see it.
Because you never know when those characters are going to come back. Can you riff for a little bit?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
need to. I need to be right back,
All
dude.
good.
I'm sorry.
All good.
Hang on.
Yeah. So a little bit of history, I guess, on the game here was I mentioned before that Street Fighter Cross Tekken was teased back in 2010 prior to the finals of Evo that year, and then was announced 2 weeks later at San Diego Comic Con, right? And then basically in the lead up to the game coming out, a bunch of promotional pre-rendered animated trailers were created to generate hype for the game, and along with that was a bunch of like licensed music from like well-known bands at the time, like Hollywood Undead and so on and so forth. Um, and there was like a full on like show like across the line was essentially like a bi-weekly infomercial on the Capcom YouTube channel, where they ran contests and interacted with the community and put out, news and trailers for the game and spoke with members of the fighting game community. And basically, were again, they were just kind of like slowly leaking out information, especially during the time of the game was still like in development and still like leading up to its release date. Capcom even going on to commission £1,000 Productions, I believe, was the name of the group, to make a short film based on Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and they also had a live reality show called Cross Assault, where they would take 5 Street Fighter fans and pit them against 5 Tekken fans in Street Fighter Cross Tekken. So there was a bunch of hype basically they were building around this game, and I mean it's cool again, right? You're gonna see the two biggest fighting games come together, and in this crossover game, and then they also teased or announced around that time, or I mean, yeah, I don't know what the terminology I guess specifically would be, but there was they'd showed off a little bit of like early development of the Street Fighter characters in the Tekken engine around that time. I think you could still see them online. You could find images of Ryu and Chun-Li, I believe, and some others. They announced this for sure. They've already had the footage for this one coming out, and then they said that the Tekken Cross Street Fighter was still in early development. As of right now, we're still waiting on any more news, unfortunately, for Tekken Cross Street Fighter. There has been basically no information on it for a while at this point. The most we've gotten so far was Akuma coming into Street Fighter, or coming into Tekken. And that's really about it. We really haven't seen much more anything from that, unfortunately. It's on indefinite hold, or, it might just be in developmental hell at this point. But, obviously, as a Tekken guy, I'm still like hoping down the line this game eventually comes out. Because again, like as much as Street Fighter Cross Tekken had its problems, I still did end up, especially coming back to this game after Jeff had mentioned it. I really fell in love with the idea of this cross style game, right? And especially just Tekken characters being developed in the style of Street Fighter characters. One of the things I really appreciated about this game was the fact that the Tekken characters were adapted so well, in my opinion, in the Street Fighter style. So Tekken, in terms of like gameplay, for if I'm going to simplify it down as much as I possibly can, and I'm going to get rinsed regardless if of what I say here, but of like more better Street Fighter or Tekken players, but Tekken really emphasizes the use of combos like juggle combos and floor bounce and wall bounce combos. From my understanding, again, I came into Street Fighter a little more seriously very, very late. I came into Street Fighter just before Street Fighter 4 came out. I played Street Fighter 2 HD Remix, and I don't recall there being wall bounce moves on there. And then 4, there were some, I think, and I still had to learn how to use those. But Tekken, that was a big thing in Tekken 4. For sure, I know Tekken 4. I'm not sure about 3. I don't recall it being in 3. I think everything, at least the battlegrounds in 3s were like essentially like an infinite floor from my recollection.
What are you talking about?
So right now I'm just talking about the way they adapted the Tekken characters over into Street Fighter 4 gameplay.
Oh yeah, no, that's a big one here.
Yeah, so I just mentioned how Street Fighter in Tekken 4 for sure. I know there were wall bounces, right? Tekken's gameplay primarily focuses on juggles, like that's their combos, right? Juggling and floor bouncing and like off the wall hits, right? To extend your combos.
Right.
And I just really like the way that they even adapted the Tekken characters into that way, right? Like they had combos that were kind of based off of Tekken combos, right? They had, I don't know if there's a term for it, but they had moves which bounced, caught them out of the air, put them down to the ground, and continued the combo from there.
Right. So the Tekken characters, first of all, the Tekken characters had all their strings, right? So they had their 1-1-2s, and any sort of traditional strings like that. The Tekken characters had all of that, and it would be in the same style as Tekken. So Tekken only uses 4 attack buttons. Street Fighter uses 6. So what you do is you do like 1-1-2-4 or something like that in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, and the string would come out. So that was one of the big things that they did for the Tekken characters. Secondly, like you said, they had recapture moves, right? That would bring people back down into either like a ground bounce or a wall bounce sort of maneuver, and you could continue combos like that. And I want to say there's one other thing that the Tekken characters mostly have versus the Street Fighter characters. I'm not quite sure,
Well, in Tekken,
but
they
I
had
do know that's a thing.
in Tekken, everyone has like a special input move, which was like a long charge move that like would do a big chunk of damage, but it left you very, very vulnerable. They had something kind of similar to that in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, where they allowed every character in the cast basically to like charge one of their specials. Do you remember
Correct,
that? Yeah,
right. So rather
that's
than
like that's like, at least from my understanding, that's probably the closest thing I can think of that they basically transfer that over.
yeah,
So
yeah,
like
that
you
makes
know, like
sense.
I remember with Ryu, you can you input a Hadouken, right? If you hold the button instead of letting it go, he could charge it to an EX, or if you fully charge it, it would be the super, but with no expenditure of your super bar or your gauge, which was like a really cool idea. I'm not sure how well it was implemented. Again, I was not very good at the game. I don't know if there was like a way to combo into it, or because I remember the charge time being like a little bit long to get to that super level. You know what I mean? But I know like
Right.
if you want to get like the EX version, essentially for free, right? It required like a second or two charge on the input, just holding it
So
and
there
letting it
are
go.
ways to combo into the chargeability. Most times people will use so what you could also do is you could charge the EX version of like your chargeable move, and the super would come out quicker. And for characters that have long EX moves, that's what you'll do. So you'll use one character's long EX move. You'll bring in your partner via the like the quick tag motion, right?
Hmm.
And you charge up the EX version of your chargeable move, and then the super version would come out sooner, and then you could combo into the super like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, like I guess it's one of the things that I never really delved too far into because I just kind of like like especially with around that time. It was only about a year or two after, right? Getting into Street Fighter 4, like I was still kind of like in that mode of like trying to learn the game. So like trying to like really dive deep into another game was pretty rough for me. So I guess I never got too super deep into Street Fighter
Hmm.
Tekken at the time. But yeah, it was, I don't know, man. Like it's such a cool thing. Like again, it's like a fanboy's dream, right? To see these two massive fighting game series to finally cross over. And again, I really liked how they took them over into the Street Fighter engine. So in like would you mention any of the four buttons, right? So Tekken, yeah, each button corresponds to a limb. That's how Tekken plays out. And yeah, basically that's how I think that's how they adapted it, right? Like it's basically like your weak and your medium, or your weak punch, your light punch versus your medium punch is like your jab and your cross, basically, right? And same with your
Correct.
legs is your front leg and your rear leg. So
As far as the strings are concerned,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you still had a light kick, a medium kick, and a heavy kick, light punch, medium punch, heavy punch. But if you were a Tekken player coming over and you wanted to do certain strings, you still had that option available to you, and it would feel just like you were playing Tekken.
Yeah.
At least as far as the inputs were concerned, the action happening on screen obviously would have been different.
They might have like rearranged the characters models, because like I know Horang is a perfect example of this, where Horang changes stances because he's a Taekwondo fighter, right? He changes from like an open stance to a closed stance. So they might have just made it so his animation would switch over to the closed stance, switching from the left leg to the right leg. But at the end of at the end of the string, his character would always flip back over to the open stance, so you see his chest to the camera still.
Right.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like how we talked about this before, at least like off recording, where Ultimate does a really really good job of like representing the guest fighters that come into the game, right? Like seeing like Terry or Ryu, Ken or Kazuya into Ultimate, right? And
Super
like
Smash Brothers Ultimate is what
yeah,
he's
sorry,
referring
yeah,
to, by the way.
yeah, Super Smash Brothers Ultimate, and like again, it everything feels like a super well respected adaptation of that character into a completely different engine, right? Especially with Ultimate being so simplified in terms of its controls. All you have is all you have is your one attack button and then a special button. and like we just feel like they do them so much justice, even in Ultimate. So like even seeing the Tekken characters coming into Street Fighter, into like a Street Fighter engine felt, good. Like that's the one thing a lot of people were nervous about. Like, how do you transfer this over, right? Would you have to slow down the gameplay a little bit just to make it so that they couldn't do as many combos, but then you have to implement their input command still, you know what I mean, right? And if I remember correctly, they did do a couple input commands. Like I think they gave everybody some sort of input command from the Tekken cast, I want to say.
Yeah, so like the Michimas and the Kazamas have their misstep.
Yeah, the little dash move, right?
Yep.
That's essentially your way to get in through projectiles, especially because in Tekken there really isn't any projectiles to deal with, right? You like Ogre, I guess, is technically one, or Devil Jin, right? But for the most part, you don't really have to deal with it. So they give them options to get around projectiles and like still approach and not have to get spammed out.
Right, right. Yeah. So most of the characters have tools to get around projectiles just because like you mentioned Tekken doesn't really have a lot of projectiles. The thing that was interesting was that they actually gave certain Tekken characters projectiles. So like Raven has projectiles, Jin has projectiles, Ogre kind of has a projectile. It's him, but he can move off screen and kind of drop down. Yoshimitsu sort of has a projectile again. He has the poison mist, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I thought that was interesting.
It was definitely a cool concept. I like the way they implemented a lot of stuff there. It kind of felt a little bit like kind of like a Dulzim a little bit, right? Where it's more like he throws like a hitbox out there, but it's technically disjointed from his body, right?
And the other thing too is like you're bringing the characters together because Tekken doesn't really have projectiles up until fairly recently. So to bring them into this game and to give them projectiles and to give them a little bit of Street Fighter charm, I thought was really cool.
Oh yeah, it was awesome to see. It was really, really cool to see. Well, we mentioned it before. Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter, your guys like Zangief and Ryu. Um, who's your Tekken guy?
So when I first started playing this game, it was Marduk.
Okay, Marduk. Gotcha.
So I really enjoyed playing Marduk with Ryu in this game. When the second patch came, like the big update patch came out,
2013. Yep.
right. So we'll talk a bit more about that later. I switched to playing Paul as my second character because again, super goofy character that hit really hard, just kind of seemed right up my alley. And then from that point on, Paul was basically like my Tekken guy firmly. It was always Kazuya, right? So I was always a Kazuya guy, but I was never good enough to play Kazuya in this game because he requires a high level of execution to be super good. You have to hit those electric god fists, meaning you have to hit that missed step input perfectly.
Yeah.
Every single time. Like they need to be on point. And so I just never could do it, right? I just wasn't I didn't have the technical skill to do so. So I just switched to Paul and now I just unga bunga everything and it's a lot more fun.
Yeah, I mean Paul's obviously a very popular character, in Tekken. Him and his best friend Law, right?
Yeah. He's good in Tekken 7. I should have played it more.
Yeah. I mean we should probably get back into some more Tekken again. I've been kind of missing playing Tekken again recently.
Yeah. All right.
But yeah, like for me in Tekken, I was an Eddie player. Specifically in Tekken 3 is when I got really into Tekken. So I play a lot of Eddie, and then in Tekken 4, it became Christine, right? I believe it was
Christy.
Yeah, Christy. Yeah, so the Christy was the replacement essentially for Eddie.
All right, so you just put your face on the controller and you've moved it back and forth, and you did stuff with Eddie.
Yeah. Mm. It's funny because I remember like when I was still getting into Tekken and getting it relatively serious into Tekken 4 specifically, I started learning the combos and I realized he doesn't have a lot of good options if people know how to obviously read you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, because especially with a lot of his like sweeps, right? The range isn't that great. Like if you have somebody with like a long standing mid, you basically just get poked out of it. Kind of like a what is it, forward medium kick with Ken, with the way he sticks the toes out for the little bit of extra range.
Right.
It was like that. You just get jabbed out. It was like, okay, cool. So I have to actually learn how to play the game with Christy and Eddie. That was my issue when I started actually learning how to play the game properly, and especially when I started playing online. Yeah, people do not do not take it easy if you're playing on you, especially if you're playing like a Eddie or a Christie, because you're just annoying to everybody else. So
I
they've
will tell
figured it
you,
out.
I will tell you, there is nothing hyper than like a well played Eddie in Tekken. So like one of the current top players, Jean Ding, plays Eddie as like a pocket character,
Mm.
and when he breaks him out, like it's incredible. Everybody goes absolutely nuts, and the he's actually pretty good with the character. Surprisingly, a top Tekken player would be really good with the Tekken character,
Yeah,
right?
right. Well, I mean, I
But
guess if they're not meta, you would assume that like, oh, is it kind of it's kind of like busting out a Ganondorf if you're like a top level Smash player, right?
right,
It's like,
exactly.
why would you do this?
Right, because it's so hype and it's so much fun to watch this character in motion. Again, like Eddie is such a cool character, and they did him so well in all the Tekken games as far as the animations are concerned.
Hmm.
So to see that in the arms of a high level player like is incredible.
It's so yeah, it's really fun to see, right? And you don't and you could tell that they're not, you could tell a good Eddie player from a bad one very very easily. Just because you always see them kind of going for that like for the like the forward like the L kick type of deal, going straight into the sweep, right? A bad player will immediately go into the sweep regardless if they didn't even confirm a hit. They'll always just throw it out there. They just always want a hitbox out there, right? And versus anybody else you'll use their other pokes, right? They'll be using the like the standing elbow pokes out there to try to catch something first and then combo into other stuff. And especially like maneuvering with the 3D space, right? Because Eddie has so many options to roll into the foreground or or roll back, right? It's just so fun to watch, especially because obviously
It is.
everyone just knows like, oh, he's the breakdance character. Yeah, it's gonna be hype. Just like animation wise,
Exactly.
it's so fun to watch. For me, I think for me in Tekken, especially when it came into Street Fighter Cross Tekken, because Abel was like my guy at the time, right? Like I was like I like grapplers and I like kind of people who do a bit of both, right? MMA style. I did try mixing Abel and Marduk together, but it kind of makes sense, right? Like you have the
You would
two, yeah,
think.
you would have the two big MMA guys, just put them in together. Unfortunately, Marduk just did not transfer for me in this game, unfortunately, and I ended up switching over to Jin. Jin is like my other Street Fight, like Tekken character, my other Tekken main character. I rotate
Right, that makes
between,
sense. From like a team building perspective too, that makes sense.
yeah, yeah,
Because you don't really, ideally, you don't really want two grapplers unless they can play off of each other.
hmm,
And Abel and Marduk kind of do the same things,
yeah,
right? As
yeah,
far as their game plan is concerned. So you definitely would want somebody like Jin who would serve as, did you play Jin on point? So you play Jin first and
yes,
then
yes,
Abel in the back? Okay, that makes sense because Jin is a strong point character and you would want Abel to come in and use the momentum that Jin just set up for you to execute your game plan.
yeah. One of the easiest combos with Jin into Abel was do that cross rush combo, right? So it was Magic series, right? So it was light, medium, heavy, heavy again, and it'll do the launcher. And with Abel, he has the dragon input grab, right? To just grab you out of the air, put you back onto the
Mm-hmm.
ground. And it was just an easy way to just rack up damage, especially early on in that game. And we can actually talk a little bit about the damage in this game a little bit when we go into a little bit some of the gameplay issues that a lot of people started realizing with this game later
Right.
on.
I
Actually,
think with a lot of people, they saw the name of this episode and they click on it because they want to hear about all bad stuff, right? So
yeah,
I
yeah.
think the negativity is well documented. I can play apologist and be like, well, this is what they were thinking, but this was what happened in reality, right?
Yeah, and I mean to be fair, like again, that 2013 patch was massive, right? That entire essentially was a full game rebalance, right? And it patched a bunch of stuff that were that was genuinely an issue, and it made the game especially for like that that more hardcore community, like this is the game that it should have came out in the first place, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And again, like I'm kind of in the same boat as you are, especially now looking back at it, where I did bounce off of Street Fighter Cross Tekken because I thought I was like I was having fun with it, but something wasn't clicking like Street Fighter 4 was, and I kind of looked deeper into it when you told me about this. Again, like what was it? Like I want to say like it was like 2 years ago when you mentioned that the game is still technically alive.
Oh yeah, yeah, no. So once we put the my PC together, right, and I was able to actually play Street Fighter X Tekken again, uh, I discovered the Discord, and people are still playing this game. There's a great community patch out that alleviates a lot of the issues that the PC release had, namely games for Windows Live. Right?
Yeah.
Is the big sticking point here, and it's been great. I mean, unfortunately, I haven't really had the chance to play online. It's at this point, but maybe that'll change in the next coming days here.
Yeah. I guess a quick explanation of the games with Windows Live thing. So this game released on, I'm assuming, probably the Windows Microsoft Store and Steam, right? I'm assuming
Correct. Yeah, it was kind of like a simultaneous
Okay.
drop.
So the issue with that was that it required a Windows account to get a Microsoft account to get into the game, right? And eventually Windows stopped using games with Windows Live,
Correct.
which essentially locked out like the entire player base. If you wanted to play online, you couldn't. Like you could log in, but nothing would happen because they had discontinued the entire thing. And so you were talking about getting into the Discord and finding the community for it, and people found ways to, patch this game into playing with all the characters offline, or I think only like a majority of the character base online, right? I forget. I think that's how. I remember it was a little bit weird when I did it myself as well.
Okay, so I mean, if we're talking about the patch, there's
let's
one
go
of
into it a
two.
little bit. Yeah.
There's the online patch that allow you to play the game online. Then there's the offline patch that unlocks all the DLC characters, which we'll talk about in a second here, and allows you to experience the game fully, but you can't play online because you're basically
bypassing.
I was going to say, how do we say this delicately? You're basically getting the DLC for free.
Yeah.
Because it's all included in there.
Yeah.
So you obviously don't want to be online for that.
No.
And so that's kind of your options, right? If you want to play this game online, you do have that option available. But if you want to play the DLC,
set.
right? But unless you purchase the DLC or do the voodoo that you do, right? And get these characters however the heck you get them. You're gonna have to do it a different way, right? You're going to have to unlock these characters a different way than using the offline patch. The offline patch is mostly for like tournaments, or if you're setting this thing up as like an event.
Yeah,
that's when you use the offline patch.
Yeah, so that's kind of the way. Again, we were saying like that's like another reason why this game was so kind of dead in the water for a little while as well, because again, like a large chunk of the player base essentially got locked out. They couldn't play this game anymore. After I want to say, what year was that? I want to say like 2014, 2015 or so when they discontinued.
Thereabout, yeah. Whenever that got done. And the other thing too, you talk about locking players out. There's so much DLC for the game that was another thing that locked people out. So I think it's time to kind of touch this subject. So I don't know if you want to take over or if you want me to kind of throw it on in there.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll start it off, and then I actually have a little bit of a short like dialogue here. If you want to go ahead and trade places with that, we'll do that actually a little bit here then.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So basically, the game had one of the greatest creations ever in video game history. On disc DLC. One of the most genius things ever done by any gaming company ever, having all the information on the disc. And, just assuming data miners and crackers weren't just going to get in there and, mine that information, right? And realize that they're expecting the player base to pay for characters that's already included in the game. This is not actually like, it's not like, oh no, you don't have this information. It's literally on the disc already. You paid full price for a game, and a bunch of characters you're not even allowed to use technically right off the bat, which is, just brilliant, marketing job right there. And I actually have, this short little bit here that I have written down from a conversation between a former Capcom USA employee and a Capcom Japanese employee as well. This was taken, this is referenced from a video done by Matt McMuscles, was on YouTube. And he essentially did an interview with one of the former Capcom USA employees. Do you want to be the Capcom USA employee?
Sure, yeah. I think that's probably better if
Yeah.
I'm the USA guy and you're the Japanese guy.
Yeah, I'm the more Asian man here, so I will go ahead and
Yeah, I was
take that
gonna
role.
say we probably should do it that way.
Or we just commit to the bit and just go the opposite way around. Okay, so
Okay,
yeah, so let's go ahead and you start it off here.
right. People are gonna find the on-disc DLC because 100% of all Xbox 360 games are cracked before launch.
Why would anyone crack the game? That's illegal.
Please remove the on-disc DLC.
Well, if we do that, we're going to have to push the game back to April or May, and we'll have to tell Mr. Tsujimoto that it was marketing's decision to push it to the next fiscal year. And the game was set to release in March 2012, and basically the Capcom Japanese representative here, and Capcom in general wanted that game to release within that fiscal year. It's to maximize their profits off of it as well, basically. And as you can hear, you can hear the naivety of the Capcom Japan employee is why would anyone crack the game? That's illegal.
Why?
Why would they do that?
Right. Why would people want this for free? I don't understand.
And lo and behold, right? People hacked the game, right? they found the extra information in that game, and were playing those characters before they were fully released online. Like,
Yeah.
oh my! And this was just like another addition to the shit show essentially that this game was, where people were playing the hacked DLC characters online, and basically ruining even more players' fun online. And
Yeah, that was the big thing, was that people were using the DLC characters online before they were even released, right?
yeah, by a couple months, like it was very very early.
hmm So, if this was just an offline thing, like I did play a cracked version of this offline, right? And we
Mhm.
were able to play the DLC characters and experience them. The one good thing, though, is that most of the DLC characters are not good.
Yeah, that is fair.
So at least
That is fair.
at least that's a thing. Like outside of like Elisa and Lars and maybe to a lesser extent Blanca,
Yeah,
they're not good. So I mean,
which is
it was
also
it
weird that
was.
Blanca was a DLC character. Like, come on now.
I know that is weird that you're first of all that a World Warrior 8 character is DLC, and then you didn't even put E Honda in the game.
Yeah, like it was a lot of bad decisions basically were going on in terms of like development for this game. Again,
hmm
Jeff mentioned it before. It is very well documented what went wrong with this game and all the negative stuff about it. You can easily find some information online.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing too that I will say, mentioning with the DLC here, is the brilliant invention of the auto gems. So this game
Yeah,
was
gems.
pushed as a more casual alternative to your traditional fighting games. They really wanted this game to be more of a party game, right? So that's why
Hmm.
you had 4-player options. You had options where all 4 characters would be on screen at the same time,
Yeah.
and you had the introduction of gems. And what gems would do is when certain criteria was met, the gem would trigger and you would receive a boost. So you had red gems that would increase your attack power. You had yellow gems that would increase your defense, meaning you'd take less damage from moves. You had blue gems that would increase your meter gains. You'd gain meter faster.
Hmm.
And then you had the green gems, which were the speed gems that would increase your movement speed. And lastly were the orange gems that increased your health. So they would restore health upon hit. And what you could do is you could edit your loadout basically and play the game how you wanted to play. So if you wanted to, have a character like a Kuma, let's say, right? And you loaded him up with defense and health gems, even though you probably should maximize his attack power, you could do that. You could basically put the gems in any order you wanted. Obviously, when you have every character with individual loadouts, that takes a lot of time when you're setting up for tournaments,
Yeah.
which was an issue. And also they introduced the auto gems, and what the auto gems would do is they would do an action automatically.
Yeah.
The most devious of this was the auto block. So if you were in a position where you would be hit, the game would automatically block for you, and you would see the gem pop up, right? And it would say, the it would trigger basically, and you would block an attack that would have otherwise hit you. And granted, this was in Capcom's naive mind. Oh, the new players will use this to get themselves more comfortable with the game before they go online. No, the worst of the worst, high level players were using this to scam out wins,
Yeah.
and yeah,
J-
and basically make the online a lot less fun. Granted, after a while, it sort of had a negative connotation to you as a player, so a lot of players ended up dropping it. But I remember early on, the auto block gem and a lot of the auto gems were around in force, and that made the game not great, especially because it was paid DLC.
yeah, and the gems being paid DLC, like even before like the release of the game, there was issues with the gem system, right? Because different retailers came with different in-game gem packs.
Oh yeah, that's
So
right.
if you bought it from Best Buy, you would get a specific gem pack, and then if you bought it from GameStop, you get a different gem pack. And so certain people would basically certain people would like go buy multiple copies of the game, get the DLC code, right? And then get the one from like Best Buy that gave you an extra, what is it, like an extra 20% damage with like a 5% speed reduction, right? And then get another gem from GameStop, which was an extra 30% damage, but with no penalty. So like even between the different retailers and the in-game gem packs, there was a difference already, which just made it more and more like just obnoxious to play against people who, especially like you mentioned the high level players were just min maxing their setups basically, and it just made it like just miserable to play online. And um, with like the gems, like I remember seeing in like an interview on in one of the videos online, one of the videos was they basically thought like, yes, while making it also more make it easier for newcomers to come into the game, right? To make it, to give themselves a little bit more leeway, right? Especially if they're playing against somebody who's better overall. There was also the issue of like again min maxing, right? Slowing the game down to a halt. Even playing online with your friends, right? That just made it terrible as well to set up stuff. Tournaments ended up just banning the gems anyway.
Correct.
And then there was another thing that I'm trying to exactly remember. Oh, so their idea was that like every character could be customized so that like there's like infinite ways to play the character, which is again cool in idea and concept. But as we mentioned, no, people are gonna min max, right? They're gonna set it up so that like Akuma can just hit way harder, and like Akuma already does more damage than than like a Ryu would do, right? Like, we're just gonna use those two as an example, right? He already does more damage than Ryu does, so you just make it so he just chunks way harder, or do the opposite thing where you mentioned, right? Give him more health and defense, right, to just balance him out more as a character. If you wanted for some reason to go that way instead of just maximizing your damage and committing to your skill superiority, right?
Correct. Right. Yeah, like you could do all that, but right, like you said, so people kind of figured out the best gems, and then it ended up becoming, oh, I'm just going to use the auto block. Oh, and this one that I forgot about was the auto tech gem. So this is a gem that would proc anytime someone would grab you, and so unless you were in the middle of a move and you couldn't tech, you just automatically tech the grab, meaning
Yeah.
that you stop the grab from occurring. So that was a lot of fun. Like you mentioned, competitive scenes banned the gems at least until the 2013 patch when standard loadouts were implemented,
Hmm.
and I thought that was really great because one of the whole points of playing this is to use the gems, right? Like you don't want to not use the gems,
Yeah.
and I think what the gem loadouts did was give players like niches, or give characters niches, right?
Yeah.
So for me, and not to get into this and get a little off track here, but basically I use the meter gems on my point character and the power gems on my back character because you want your anchor to be able to hit harder, and you
Hmm.
want your point character to generate meter.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And I think if they did that from the start, and like you said, like this 2013 patch should have been the game, right? Going back to that conversation, the little anecdote that we had there, if the 2013 version of this game was the actual game that launched, I think people are thinking about Street Fighter Cross Tekken a little differently, to be honest.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's absolutely the case. Because again, the game released in 2012, and it took them 1 year for the Capcom developers to really sit down and like listen to the community and see what they needed to fix, basically. Which again,
Mhm.
if they could have just waited a little bit longer, this game would have been much better received, I think, overall by the community, and not just have this, unfortunately, this bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, right?
Right.
Um,
The other thing too was that the games took a long time, right? And
yeah,
you had a lot of timeouts.
yeah,
And I remember it being like Street Fighter Cross Timeout was one of
yeah.
the
That was a big meme, right? That they just or like
yeah,
yeah, one
Street
of the
Fighter
nicknames
Cross
for it.
Timeout was
Ugh.
the thing that players would say, because you were right, like games just took too long because you didn't have gems, so you didn't have the additional resources that the gems provided.
Yeah,
Street Fighter 4 games already took long enough when you're dealing with one character and max resources, right? You had your super meter, you had your ultra meter
hmm,
too. This game didn't have that because it was designed and balanced around including the gems.
yeah,
And when you take the gems out of it and you just have super combos and you just have, your EX moves, obviously, player characters aren't going to die quite
yeah.
so fast, especially at a high level.
Yeah, and another issue with the again like this the damage just not being there is damage also didn't stick. Again, Street Fighter Cross Timeout, people would just basically get a defensive lead, right? Like because the Great Life mechanic when the character was tagged out was just too fast. They would just regain health at like a way overly generous rate and get a good chunk of their health back, and none of the health would stick. A thing they fixed in the 2013 patch where grabs would no longer allow that that character to regain that health back.
Right, so grabs would remove the gray health. Right, it would just delete the entire gray health, and that character just had whatever health that they had left. The other thing too that contributed to the length of games was the cross assault. That's it, cross assault maneuver, where basically both characters would come out and
Oh
they
yeah,
would
yeah.
average out each other's health bar, right?
Hmm.
So if you finally manage to get one character gone and your opponent manages to tag that low health character out, your opponent could just cross assault and then both characters would have half their health again.
Yeah,
So while, the one character that was untouched lost health, the character, usually the point character that was near death, got half their health bar back, and
yeah.
that was tough, right? So that contributed to the length of games as well. So I do think there was a lot wrong with it, but I thought it was fun.
It was
Like
still very
even
yeah. That's
even
the
before
thing.
the patch, yeah.
Yeah, like because again, it was just a cool thing to see the fact that like again these two big fighting games got to cross over and got to basically meet. Right, it was a really awesome thing to see. I mean, like for me, I want to say like like one of the favorite things that I got to see, especially early on before I started really diving back into the game, was just seeing that cross rust mechanic. Right, just the this Magic Series combo, and especially seeing like being able to do like two supers into each other. Right, they did the combo supers. Right,
Yes,
um,
yes, yes.
that
The
was in the trailer, right? That was like Chun Li would do her super and then kick the opponent into Ryu, who's charging a Metsu in the background, which was like such a cool animation too. Like it was just it's so cool to see, and you could also certain characters had like extra animations, right? If you paired them up together, that's like just these little touches were so cool to see. Like watching like watching like Fei Long interact with Law. You know what I mean? It was just like it was such a nice little happy moment for people who were just fans of both franchises here. Yeah, unfortunately, there was another issue with Capcom. Unfortunately, they cannibalized their own fighting game player base with in 20 again. So the game was announced in 2012 or 2010, right? And they announced Marvel vs. Capcom 3 that same year. They did I think it was Tatsunoko Ultimate All Stars as well. They released it in 2010. And then Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition came out in 2010 as well too. So that's another unfortunate thing where they were running like four games in terms of like they're hyping up and or supporting the player bases at the time. Where there's just too much going on basically just for them to compete with themselves, unfortunately. But again, like It's a sad thing to see, but like again, like there is still like a player base that is still is very very much so strong here. Again, I really appreciate from Jeff really bringing me back into this player base and really enjoying my. And again, I really find myself enjoying this game still. Like there's as much as like there are still like issues and stuff like that, but like maybe some minor balance issues, but they fixed a lot of things from before in the initial base game where they gave like the Tekken characters some very well needed buffs and some well deserved buffs, right? To avoid projectiles and anti airs and stuff like that. And just give them a little more leeway and breathing room into playing against the Street Fighter characters. And it was just again like it's a cool way to see them like actually balanced out and like fighting on like even terms in a playing ground kind of deal. So yeah, I mean again, I really still really find myself enjoying this game. I pick this game up every once in a while still, and put a couple hours in and just mess around, just learning some of the combos and figuring out some of the cool pairings in this game basically. And while I don't want to sound completely doom and gloom on this game, as I know I may have sound, we both may have sounded over the last hour or so. There is some really good things about this game. Again, it's just a crossover of the two biggest fighting games ever, especially like if you just consider it's the size of the audiences, right, of the two games playing together. Again, after all that was initially wrong in the base version launch of the game, that 2013 update to the game really fixed a lot of things that were there. Hence why the community there's still a very strong niche community for this game. And again, another reason for why Jeff even then ended up bringing me back into this community, because it's genuinely a really, really good game. It's different enough from Street Fighter 4, a little bit easier for me to get into, especially because I'm not as serious into it. But I think it's a little bit more friendly overall. And again, being able to really mix up your squads, right? Being able to play Tekken characters with Street Fighter characters and just kind of seeing the worlds collide and find out these cool combos and tricks and matchups you want to do with them is really really cool. Changes the gameplay a little bit from the typical Street Fighter format. Just the tag format is very fun. I really really enjoyed it, especially in Tekken, and I think it really really lent itself in a really cool way over to Street Fighter 4 to have that dynamic versus any other tag game you could think of from Capcom, like the Marvel versus Capcom series or the Street Fighter Cross series, where it's you have to knock out all three, very much so like a Dragon Ball Z Fighters is a more modern version of it, I guess, where you have to knock out the whole team. For here's it creates a little bit of extra tension, in my opinion, at least in terms of like the way the Tekken Tag does their stuff, more character management and team management. The supercharge system was really cool. Again, every character having a special move that they could charge up to become an EX move or a super that doesn't use meter. Very, very cool. And again, just creates a lot more gameplay options. You can make some really, really hype combos off. You get a launcher off, having the character ready, kind of charging off in the background as you tag the other character out. Very cool stuff. And again, just the transformation of the Tekken characters into the 2D fighting style. Really, really well done. Like again, the Tekken characters definitely have their personalities and their styles still kind of represented in the Street Fighter engine. It's very, very cool. And another small thing that I really enjoyed in this game is there was a color edit mode, which allowed players to completely customize their characters, for better or for worse, right? The people would go crazy with the neons and the colors and stuff like that, but it was just cool being able to make your own Ryu costume, basically. That was a big thing for me, like especially seeing the color palette swaps that they had for Street Fighter 4 specifically. And it was cool to make my own color matches for my own characters and stuff like that. I really enjoyed that. And the Tekken characters being a transformer over, they had the combos that included juggles and floor bounces and wall hits. It was just nice to have there. And again, it was genuinely like a friendly game for me to get into, and really like kind of dig my hands back into it, and really really enjoy myself. So again, thank you, Jeff, for getting me back into this one here. Yeah, but I guess that's it from my end. What about you, Jeff?
All right, I think that's about it as far as Street Fighter Cross Tekken is concerned. The game, I don't actually know if the game is available on Steam right now, but if you have a chance, definitely consider picking it up, joining the great Street Fighter Cross Tekken community that's online still. This game is a lot of fun. It's a game that's near and dear to my heart, and it's a game that I really want to get back into. So definitely consider it. Also, please consider liking, subscribing, sharing this with your friends, listening to it at your barbecues. I don't know why you would do that, but whatever you want to do with it. Just, help us out here. We would really appreciate it. And because, God, I hate going to work at 9 o'clock in the morning. So for both of us, Lakan, if you have anything left to say, please feel free.
Again, we are on all major streaming platforms. Go ahead and give us a listen, share us with a friend. And yeah, that's it for us for this episode.
Yeah, folks, we'll see you next time.
Take care.